what happens is that there are many ways of using the methodology. The methodology can be physical, which means using the eyes of the flesh. The eyes of the flesh is our sensory experience. What we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we taste and smell. This is the eyes of the flesh. And all the instruments of science are nothing other than prostheses or extensions of the eyes of the flesh. So that's one methodology for exploring so-called reality. A second methodology for exploring so-called reality is the eyes of the mind, which is beyond the eyes of the flesh. If I want to understand the theorem of Pythagoras, then I have to know the methodology that employs the understanding of Euclidean geometry. And then I can say to you, well, this is the methodology of Euclidean geometry, and if you employ this methodology, you'll get an aha experience. You'll understand the theorem of Pythagoras. And then you and I will share the same experience. So that's the second kind of methodology, the eyes of the mind. And the third kind of methodology, which emerged about 6,000 years ago in our history, is what is called the eye of the soul, the eye of the spirit, which says that there is yet another way to explore the world beyond the eyes of the flesh, beyond the eyes of the mind. It is through the disciplines that have come down to us through the wisdom traditions of the world, the disciplines of meditation, which allow us to go into the experience of restful alertness, which is beyond mind and body, beyond the eyes of the mind, beyond the eyes of the flesh, and explore yet another aspect of reality. And if I can share with you that methodology, then you will have the same experience. And if we agree on that same experience, then it's just as valid a science as the eyes of the flesh or the eyes of the mind. So with this ability to elicit the restful alertness response, which, as I said, was the methodology that was employed by the axial sages, a whole new world of experience opened to humanity. And it is from this new world of experience that the knowledge of Ayurveda and consciousness-based medicine is derived, that we'll be going through this whole week. Because with the ability to elicit the restful alertness response came the ability to elicit yet another response, and that was called the intuitive response. The intuitive response is to go into the eyes of the soul, through the eyes of the soul, into the realm of this deeper reality, which is beyond mind and body, and actually access a form of intelligence which is very different from our intellectual intelligence. Our intellectual intelligence is rational, it's linear, it is based on direct cause and effect. This is the cause of this, and this results in this. Logic. Whereas the eye of intuition, or the intuitive response, goes to a deeper level of intelligence which is more contextual, which is more relational, which is more holistic, which looks at the world at many levels of existence, which is more intuitive, more nourishing, more wise, does not have a direct win-lose orientation, and is not based on direct linear cause-effect relationships. This is the intuitive response. And when the ancient sages of the Upanishads discovered the intuitive response, they exclaimed, there's a famous expression that comes from the Vedic literature, Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmande, which says, as is the atom, so is the universe. As is the human body, so is the cosmic body. As is the human mind, so is the cosmic mind. And that there is an inner intelligence within us, which is the ultimate and supreme genius. It mirrors the wisdom of the universe, and it's beyond rational thought, but it's much more precise in its computing system and much more accurate, actually. And that's the next response that humans had. And as a result of the intuitive response, they developed yet another response, which can only be called the creative response, in which they developed the ability to create something that seemingly never existed before, a new combination of elements and forces in the human consciousness to create something that actually had no existence before. The creative response. And from the creative response came yet another response, the visionary response, to see as a result of that new creation a vision of possibilities of what is possible in the future, what is possible in the field of pure potentiality, which doesn't exist now, but to have a vision of what we can create in the future. And from the visionary response came the next response, the sacred response, having created something that never existed before, having a vision for the possibilities in the future. How does that allow me to get in touch with the Creator herself, or the Creator himself, or the Creator itself, whatever word you want to use, to get in touch with that part of us which is infinite and unbounded. So in the last 7,000 years, we can see that in terms of just the evolution of our own consciousness, a term that I like to use the word metabiological evolution. Darwinian evolution was all about survival of the fittest, was all about who was the best predator. But metabiological evolution is about the evolution of our own consciousness. We see that metabiological evolution, which is the evolution of consciousness and ultimately consciousness of consciousness, takes us beyond the primitive responses of fight, flight, and reactive responses, to restful awareness, intuitive responses, creative responses, visionary responses, sacred responses. These are the 7 basic responses that the human nervous system is capable of. The whole scientific edifice of Ayurveda is built on the ability to elicit these responses. And as I mentioned to you, this whole knowledge evolved about 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. About the early part of 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, though, something else happened. And what really happened was that we saw the emergence, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, of great scientists. I don't need to name all of them, but the principal one that everyone seems to relate to, who created the new paradigm that took us away from the age of agriculture into the mechanistic and industrial age, was Isaac Newton, with very elegant methodologies of the mind and also eyes of the flesh and eyes of the mind. He developed a new conceptual framework. And the new conceptual framework explained everything in the universe in mechanistic terms, which means that matter became the god. Invisible forces disappeared for a while, and invisible forces, even though they were acknowledged, gravity being the most important and electromagnetic forces also, even though they were acknowledged, in fact, the whole basis of understanding of these forces was a mechanistic worldview. If you can understand the nature of matter, then you can understand everything. If you can understand how molecules behave, then you can understand everything. And with that mechanistic worldview, we saw the emergence of our so-called modern scientific medicine as well. Modern scientific medicine is the offspring of the mechanistic worldview, which looks at the world through the eyes of the flesh, the eyes of the mind, and says, if I understand the nature of molecules, then I understand the nature of the universe. The universe is like a big mechanical clock. It has all these parts to it. If I understand the parts and how they work, then I know how the clock works. And so this mechanistic worldview also gave rise and this is part of our industrial age, emerged with it.